idea of any mythical character or superhero handling any of that stuff, that's not their job. All right. For them to bring it up in a storyline and get you thinking about it, and maybe to throw out a couple of ideas and suggestions about how to improve something like that, that's fine. Most people who, watch TV, go to the movies, read comic books, they don't want to be preached to. The main reason that they're into these things is escapism. They're trying to get out of what's going on with, the real world. Like I said, me, unfortunately, I'm one of those people who actually listen to like news radio and, keep up with what's going on in the world. This morning I was watching George Stephanopoulos. I keep up with what's going on. When I read comic books or watch movies, it's to escape all of that. And one of the things about, a hero, I personally believe that everyone has to take their own responsibility for what they did. As it brought up, I actually own a comic book and gaming store over in Stone Mountain on Memorial Drive. Who here is familiar with Memorial Drive? Okay. How many bookstores on Memorial Drive? Okay. All right. If I hadn't put a comic book and gaming store on Memorial Drive, there wouldn't be a comic book and gaming store on Memorial Drive. I took something that I love. I've been a chess player and reading comic books since I was 9 years old. All right, I knew that for me growing up and for my friends who were exposed to these games and also reading, it improved our lives. It made us more well-rounded people. All right, I could have, thought about, the color green and put my store up in Gwinnett, could have put it out in Cobb or anything else. But I was living in DeKalb County, and I knew that DeKalb County needed what I was offering. So for 15 years, I put a shop on Memorial Drive so that I could basically create and cultivate what I consider the next 2 generations of nerds. Because I knew that once I exposed these guys to reading comic books, playing collectible card games, playing D&D, they were going to expose their kids to it. And if I hadn't done it, no one else would have. So I wanted them to, have somebody else to look up to, or another, viewpoint of life that they can look up to, besides just wearing their pants hanging off their butts or have tattoos going off the side of their neck and then wondering why they can't get no job. As I said, I'm the controversial one. Okay, I have no problem with tattoos. But when you got it going up the side of your head, and you complain about not getting a job, I'm like, sometimes you have to conform, people. And you got to look at who's hiring. All right, so like I said, I'm the controversial one. Heroes, their job is to distract us and make us feel better about our lives. We can watch the news if we want to be depressed.
Thank you, Tony. Ms. Shabazz.
Well, can you
Okay,
say the question again?
this was about basically real world issues that are affecting everyone now. And basically, I gave a list of universal health care, gentrification, obesity, youth genocide, racial profiling, and environmental issues as just some standout topics to say what heroes currently exist that are combating these issues, or you can go that angle, or you can add to it what ways should comics and related media, because I want to stretch this panel out that it's not just comics. Comics are inspiration for a lot of other things, with video games, movies, etc. But what type of social responsibility do you feel that these medias have to address these issues, especially when our creators are creating new books and content, independent books, to affect our communities?
It's an interesting question. I really can only speak from my own experience because I came to comics a little bit late. Actually, Joseph, my husband, so he's the one who introduced me to comics. Prior to Joseph, I was really more interested in science fiction primarily and hadn't really read any comic books. So we used to go to Oxford.
In particular, movies and novels.
Yeah, movies and novels mainly. And when I first was introduced to comics, Joseph was going to Oxford Comics. Everybody know about Oxford Comics? And so he's like, I'm going to go to Oxford Comics. I'm like, okay. And so I go in, look around, And I was pretty fascinated because I'm an artist, a visual artist, and love to draw. And I was so fascinated that I was like, this is kind of interesting. I like what people are doing as far as creating the artwork. But my personal history makes me have a different perspective on the storytelling part. Because I come from, just to give you a little information about myself, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and my family is a very Afrocentric family, very creative family. And I grew up in a family in which the culture that we practice comes from southwestern Nigeria. It's a Yoruba culture. And so I was exposed to myth, the concept of myth, at a very early age. And there's a lot of storytelling going on. My father is like a master storyteller. So the first stories that he told me were fascinating, and all of the characters in the story were African. So kind of merging that together with my first time seeing comics and what the content should be like, there's a lot of fascinating stories that we have to tell. So, obviously.
Sister Grace, and I ain't forgot you, Hannah. You still there?
I'm right here, yes sir.
Okay, can you hear everybody well?
Oh yes, here and there, and all going on.
Oh yeah, you got to stream it, that's what's happening. And by the way, for everybody who's streaming this, we appreciate you watching. Okay, Grace?
To tag on to that, I actually have on a shirt that kind of shouts out some of the sci-fi and speculative fiction writers, and I think that's definitely a great avenue to target some of the issues that you were addressing. It just looks at it in a futuristic way, which I think a lot of people don't want to look to the future. I think they're like stuck in the present, and so you got those, and then Janelle Monáe is like this upcoming artist, or not upcoming, she's pretty much out there, who I really admire. Yes, absolutely. And she's been like talking and giving a face, at least definitely from a female point of view also, that is just kind of like blowing off the charts. And I kind of liken her to a Sun Ra, who pretty much he was doing the same thing when he was out. And so talking about issues that are up to date, that are present, and things that are going to be happening in the future. But people want to think you're crazy when you say something that's going to happen, but then it happens, and then it's like, oh, maybe they were right. So then as far as like a comic character, there's this character that I've grown to love, Martha Washington, who was, grew up in Cabrini Green in Chicago, and basically was during the Reagan era, like was when her story came out. So she was talking about the war on drugs. She was talking about, all the politics and stuff that were going on. And so just like this brother here said, it may be an escapism, but there was also some real stuff going on there as well too. So, and then the movies, that's what pop culture does. Like they expose what everybody else in the politics and in the government is talking about, but they just do it in an entertaining way. So.
One more from Yabo on that, Missy.
I just wanted to, when we started talking, it sparked my brain, but what I was going to say is that in traditional culture, the way myth is used is to solve problems, but we're very entertaining with it. So what we do is we dance it, we sing it, and we tell it. So.
You learned a lot from your dad's story, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
so,
myths are for.
But it was. I would agree with you in that it wasn't like you would just be like, oh gosh, another story. You'd be like, oh, it's another story coming up. So I think what's so interesting about this particular movement of the Black Age, of what African American and African diasporic creators are doing, is they're bringing that to this particular movement, that same culture.
Hannibal, did you want to add to this particular topic?
I was actually sitting in my seat dancing about what this is there, because that's very much the thought that I was having. The concept that the stories that we tell need not be didactic or preachy in terms of hammering somebody over the head with some overarching point. However, if characters in the story can exhibit a journey from going from one perspective to another and learning something and growing, and in the process showing an example of
next one is particularly pointed at Zeno and Tony K. I want to start off by giving a quote, and then I'll ask the question. And naturally, everyone else is welcome to chime in on this topic. But the quote is, Superman, he explains, and I'll tell you who this was, represents white culture in an intensely megalomaniacal, that word throws me every time, megalomaniacal way. To too many blacks, he is not Superman so much as he is super white man. There's no sign on the comic shop window that reads white power, but the sensibility is implied. That was a quote by writer Christopher Priest. He's a black writer, and he wrote the book Steel at one period, which was, to some folks, you could basically say like a black Superman.
He had a Black Panther run too.
And he did, yes. He also did
That's like a Black Panther
As a
run.
writer on Black
Panther.
Panther. He's especially known for that. But prior to that, he had also done Steel. So my question is, in your experience with all consumers in comic shops, how easy or hard has it been to sell independent or mainstream comics with black characters? Is it a better market now or worse for such books right now? Start with Zeno.
I've been a comic retailer for 7 years, so not as long as Tony. Still growing, but in the time that I've been doing it, I'd say the market has grown. Unfortunately, more so, the market has grown for mainstream characters to get their properties in black hands than independent black creators, but that's on a high trajectory also. Like everything is kind of just growing exponentially at once, especially based on the people and groups of people that I see coming into the shop. Like, my shop is in a little 5 Points, so it's already pretty diverse there. But now you get like groups of black teenagers coming in together, knowledgeably discussing whatever character, whatever genre, whatever fandom that they're particularly attached to. Separate groups of them that don't know each other and want to argue in the store, and I have to tell them to shut up unless you can buy something, that kind of thing. But that's good. I mean, and that is the place for it. As far as how that relates to the larger overarching culture and how comics can be seen as basically like this white realm of activity, it's like a double-edged sword, because yes, it totally is that. On one hand, like if you from the outside looking in, no matter what your background, it's gonna seem like it's an extension of corporate America, which at this point they're totally in bed together. But also, then when you look from within that culture that it's supposed to represent, they don't like it either. They don't appreciate it either. Those people that are into that are weird, crazy, geeky, nerdy people, and that's a perception that only has changed within the past decade. Like before 2000, you don't get this aura of like, oh, he's the cool dude with the comic books and the robots and stuff. Before that it was like, oh man, you ain't watching the game.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's what people, that's what people were. That's what the perception was. It was like this either or thing. Whereas now it's just another thing that people do.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're treading those waters, I mean, being African American is almost like being like bicultural somehow. You have to be able to navigate in many different types of environments. And then the funny thing is, people that actually are from some other country, they won't acknowledge that. But they'll be like, oh, well, you don't have no language, or you don't have no country or whatever. We do. You know what I'm saying? But that's a whole different conversation. So it just depends on the situation. And that perception of Superman has been addressed at length by authors from all different backgrounds. He's basically a fascist. He's been portrayed as a hand of the government military complex. He's also been portrayed as, representative of the everyman that had risen above, representative of immigrants, you know what I'm saying, or small middle class America because of his adopted parents. So it's just, when you're dealing with those emphatic versus emphatic political connotations of any representation of a character, you have to go on a story by story, instance by instance basis.
Thank you. Tony, we'll let you look at it.
Okay. Well, like I said, but again, you know, I'm gonna have to agree with Eric now. Well, first of all, let me just say this. As a character, I've never been a fan of Superman. Okay, I've got a problem with the guy who has like a superpower for everything. And basically the character allows the writer, because I do writing and editing with Terminus Media, which is my other company. And whenever you have a character that can do everything, and a writer can write himself into a hole and then come up with a superpower to get him out of it, that's not entertaining to me. That's the kind of stuff I dislike. All right, as far as Superman being, you know, I guess like super white man, I guess it really depends on who the writer is and what storyline is going on. Because as you know, we have to take a look at it. It's like a lot of us, when we look at Jews, I mean, to us they're white, okay, but to them, especially early in, you know, the history in the 1900s, they considered themselves to be, you know, put down upon. All right, you know, they were the ones and stuff that, you know, the foot of man was on. So when they created Superman, you know, to them it wasn't like they were creating the super power man or super white man. They were creating a hero that could be for what they considered the everyman, for the immigrant. So as far as like, you know, how you look at Superman, it really depends on who's writing them at the time. But like I said, personally, I just got a problem with anybody who's got like all those freaking powers. And you know, you basically can just tell a horrible story and just have a superpower spring out of nowhere. I mean, really? Super ventriloquism? I'm like, really? You know? And then the Flash is supposed to be the fastest man on Earth. Okay, but then all of a sudden, Superman can run that fast. You know? And until John Byrne came around, there was no reason or way to explain how Superman flew. He just leaped and was flying and could push planets. I'm like, I'm sorry, I have no use for a character like that.
All right. Anybody else on the panel like to take that one?
Please let me tag you.
He's just bubbling. He's bubbling. Go ahead, Helen.
Yes, sir. First, I want to thank you for mentioning Christopher Priest, who so many of us do not know paved the way for so many of us to do so much. He was the first black writer, the first black editor in comics, in mainstream comics at least.
And what was his name when he was editing?
So the fact that you mentioned him made me extraordinarily happy. I want to
Tony,
mention that.
no doubt. Tony had a question for you. What'd you say?
All right, and what was his name when he was editing for Marvel?
What was his
What
name?
was his pen name?
For Marvel, his pen name.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't like to talk about that, but he used to be called Jim Owsley, but please don't ever say that to him because he gets super angry.
Oh, okay.
And you can look up Jim Owsley in the old comic books. He wrote some really good stuff when he was doing the Falcon miniseries. Jim Owsley and Christopher Priest both are excellent writers.
Okay. Very well put. All right. Go ahead,
So,
Helen.
Superman, for most of his 75 years, despite the original Siegel and Schuster intention, has acted as an agent of the status quo. His goal has been to make sure that the boat stays righted as it currently is, which, if you live at a certain level of society, is fine. You want society to keep working the way it is. The trains run on time, the police do what they're going to do, and so on and so forth. However, for most of its history, America has had a pretty crappy experience for black people as the status quo. So if Superman serves to enforce the status quo, he's essentially working against us. And we have, at certain points, as a reader, as a critical thinker, you're going to look at that and be like, hey, wait a minute. So much so that there was a book called Superman Peace on Earth that was a large format prestige book that they did where Superman addressed some of these issues. He went to try to bring food to starving areas of Africa, because of course that's the first place you got to pick.
Oh, yeah, of
Blah,
course.
blah, blah. And when he did so, he was faced with, oh, well, the corruption there, the warlords took the food before the people could get it, there's nothing you can do, because if you take me out, oh, there'll just be 5 guys just behind me, and you're not that super, blah, 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 blah. And Superman then gets a sad look on his face and flies back to his happy little white life, and then decides he's just going to be an example to
Shout out to Brandon.
He labeled one of the problems Black Geek Stockholm Syndrome. That we have gotten to the point where we have so little that when we get, oh my God, there's a Mighty Avengers book, Negro Avengers, let me run out and support it. Yet there's no black people on the creative staff. Marvel has hired one black writer since 2009, and so on and so forth, that we are end up supporting things that are not really for us. They're really not helping with us. The other side of that is I was a judge on the Glyph Awards last year, and I got so many nominations. Probably 75% of the nominated material I received were not worth even looking at, let alone reading. The print quality was low, there were typos, the stories didn't make sense, the art was amateurish, and so on and so forth. And if we go into the public with this sort of product, people are going to look at us like, y'all don't know what y'all doing. You do not have your game together. Why would we give you money? Which reinforces the black game, Black Geek Stockholm Syndrome. So in all things, if we can step our game up and present ourselves in a more professional fashion, not in a more white fashion. I'm not saying we have to speak white or whatever, but we just make sure that the pages are in the right sequence, and we run spell check. And, oh, right, we're not in England. Let's put the period inside the quotation mark. Things like that. We can have a better perception of ourselves and start to break through and make it easier for all of us to sell. Because the bad product makes, well, I'm not going to, point too many fingers at a specific thing, but when something really bad comes out, it makes it harder for the rest of us.
Okay. Thank you. And I also want to mention, since you brought it up, I and fellow panelists here, Hannibal Taboo, are official judges of the Glyph Awards for 2014. If you're not familiar with the Glyph Awards, they're announced annually at the East Coast Black Age Comics Convention in Philadelphia, PA, and it serves the purpose of honoring black or other ethnic creators who have contributed to the comics medium with works featuring significant presence of black characters. Creators may submit right now. I don't know if we have any in the audience or anybody streaming that would like to be aware of this, but you can start submitting your entries right now, and preferably ones that don't sound like what Hannibal was just talking about. But
I'll
yeah.
just say very quickly that 25% that were good are stellar. They're so good it's scary.
Okay.
But you have to wade through a lot to get to them.
I feel you. All right. So, I want to also again quote our track of the day, Ain't No Such Thing as a Superman. One of the other verses reads, "You was on the Nile, you went to see great Egypt fall. It fell down to the ground. Yes, and you was out there on the corner when being cool went blind. You alone understand that if we gonna win, we got to get together, stay together, be together, stick together." Playing off of those words, I wanted to speak note to a recent example of being together, sticking together, doing it the right way, promoting our efforts. There's an article that was published in the Atlanta Voice newspaper. Everybody familiar with the Atlanta Voice? It's one of our only remaining black-owned papers in the nation, and one of our local ones. And there was an article published in the October 18th through 24th. It comes out, in sessions like that. In the issue, it had an article by Stafford L. Battle. He's a writer and a sci-fi writer. And he did the article on how he felt black science fiction, speculative fiction can save the black community. And he gave an official shout out to Einstein. He gave a shout out to a lot of other conventions in the Black Age community. And he mentioned that, in his opinion, Atlanta is, quote, an unofficial hub of African American speculative fiction. So I definitely wanted to mention that and make that aware to folks. But I wanted to say that was a great example of something that, I know Stafford. I've met him at Einstein, but we haven't seen each other in a while. He hasn't been to one of our more recent events in a while. But here I am looking to the paper, and I'm just like, oh, what is this? Einstein, yeah. It's like, represent, and that's the type of thing. Another great example, and I'll point this over to Dawood for that, to just speak on how we can push our own efforts and give light to, like Hannibal was saying, there was the 27, I think I'm saying the right percentage, of good material that came through the Glyphs last year that he got a chance to review. So when we see the good, and we want to set that bar, so that all of that mediocre work can look up and say, well, dang, I want to be up there with them. Well, then that means you need to be at the Einstein Institute presentations such as what we're doing right now. There shouldn't be an empty chair in here. There are people who often come to our event or want to be a part of the event, and, you know, on the spot saying, can I get on? And I'm like, that ain't how it works. There's a process. And you have to prove yourself in anything. Where's your work? Where's your credentials? Where's the example of why you're worthy? And so, and these are real rites of passage, not abuse, you know, not fraternity abuse and paddling and craziness. We're talking about, you know, go home, get in the books, do the research, do the art, come back to me, then show me what you got. And when we do that, and when we do it to the degree that, say, a brother man has done, you get results like there's a video and a track now by Dead Prez and a brother named Mike Crenshaw that I would drop this on Facebook the other day, and I was like, whoa, I'm listening to the track, and I'm, you know, when I listen to hip hop, yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah, beat check, African, you know, got that, all right, what he's saying? And I'm listening for every verse, like, I ain't heard not one thing I don't like, I ain't seen not